Okay.
Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. It's delightful to have Brian McVay back. We're doing this series on Julian Jaynes ideas, and currently we are exploring the book that Brian has written and is about to be published soon. It's applying Julian Jaynes ideas to psychotherapy and personal growth. So Brian, take it away.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, I thought I lost you for a second there. So I have it up, the PowerPoint. Can everyone see it okay?
Yep.
Okay, so as you can see, the title of today's discussion, Excerption, Riding the Stream of Consciousness. So some of you may be new to this, and if you are, of course, that's okay. And the reason why I say that is because some of these topics I've sort of touched upon before. But just to reiterate what Shrikant just said, to give some context, what I'm talking about today is coming from a big project that I've been working on in book form about how the ideas of Julian Jaynes have psychotherapeutic relevance. And I approach that from different angles, but one angle that I'll be talking about today is to look at the nature of consciousness itself. And in order to avoid confusion, I prefer to use the term features of conscious interiority. And that's what foci means. And the idea here, in order to understand consciousness, is to break it down into about a dozen or so features or functions. And I think a good analogy to this in another science is what happens in physics or quantum physics when they try to understand the atom. And of course, the atom, as we know, is a basic building block of nature. However, if we stop at the level of the atom, there's still so much that doesn't make sense. There's still so many things that need to be explored. And of course, we know that now we can break the atom down into protons, electrons, neutrons, and then those subatomic particles can also be broken down into quarks, bosons, gluons, neutrinos, whatever. I'm not a physicist, but in any case, we have to approach consciousness in the same way. We have to stop just using the word and look at exactly what is consciousness. And for those of you who have been to these discussions before, I've talked a bit about mental space and mental imagery. Today, I'm going to be looking at excerptions. And so the question now is, what do I mean by excerption? So it's important to point out that in consciousness, we are never seeing anything in its entirety. So consciously interiorized seeing, to quote Jaynes, is an analog of actual behavior, and in actual behavior, we can only see or pay attention to a part of a thing at any one moment. So notice that seeing is in quotations. So I'm not talking about perception. I'm talking about, well, you can say conscious interiority, or you can say introception. Okay, so that maybe is not very clear right now, and we can talk about that later. In fact, I'll try to clarify that in a moment, but I'm just trying to get the discussion going on what the nature of excerption is. So this is a quote from Jaynes, and probably I'm going to rely on a bit too many of his quotes in today's talk, but the reason why I'm relying on what Jaynes said is because he really summed up, I think, difficult ideas. So in any case, the example here is about exception. If I ask you to think of a circus, you will first have a fleeting moment of slight fuzziness, followed perhaps by a picture of trapeze artist or possibly a clown in the center ring. Or if you think of the city which you are now in, you will excerpt some feature, such as a particular building or tower or crossroads. Okay, so that just kind of gives us an idea of what we're dealing with when we talk about excerption. Um, this thing sticks for some reason, my PowerPoint, but in any case, so as a feature of conscious interiority, excerption permits us to, quote, see only one aspect of a thing. In the same way, we can only devote a limited amount of attention with our senses to something in the external world. Another way to talk about excerption is to view it as the editing of mental representations for higher level conceptualization. In other words, excerption allows us to think things through because we're just looking at certain angles of a thing in our head. And it could be anything, really. It could be a scene, it could be a person, it could be an abstract thought, it could be an emotion. So again, this is another quote from Jaynes, and he says, he wrote, "The eye edits from the collection of possible attentions to a thing which comprises our knowledge of it. Actually, we are never conscious of things in their true nature, only of the excerpts which we make of them." And if you note, I say that the eye edits or excerpts or selects from this, what we might call stream of consciousness. We can talk about this later, but I'll just mention it now. When I say the eye edits, that's just a convenient expression because I don't really think that the eye edits, because the eye is another feature of conscious interiority that we can talk about another time. So the question is, what is excerpting? What is selecting things from the stream of consciousness? What is editing our mental representations? We don't have to answer that now, but I just want to throw that out there. That's more of a philosophy of mind question, but I do think that it's important to note. So again, this is something I've already mentioned. Another way to think of excerption, the mind selection that picks and chooses among different options that the psyche manufactures. You might say that the psyche sort of throws into this flowing stream of consciousness. So sometimes people might think that excerption is the same as memory, but actually it's not. An excerpt of a thing is in consciousness the representative of the thing or event to which memories adhere. So that's a little bit I think difficult to follow. But my understanding is an excerption is something that memories are recruited to. So for example, if I ask you to excerpt uh, a restaurant that you go to, that you frequent, there's a good chance that you'll picture the restaurant in your mind, but then an array of memories will also be evoked, or those memories will be recruited to that excerption. So memories and excerptions are related, but they're not exactly the same thing. So to quote Jaynes again, if I wish to remember what I was doing last summer, I first have an excerption of the time concerned, which may be a fleeting image of a couple of months on the calendar until I rest in an excerption of a particular event, such as walking along a particular riverside. And from there, I associate around it and retrieve memories about last summer. This is what we mean by reminiscence. So to reminisce is a succession of excerptions. Each association in consciousness is an excerption, an aspect or image, something frozen in time, excerpted from the experience on the basis of personality and changing situational factors. So we can see how past experiences or what is going on in our immediate environment actually shape excerptions, or I think a better way to put it, they shape which excerptions I'm going to select out. So if I'm very anxious, if I'm under a lot of pressure, if something is bothering me, my excerption is going to be very different from if I was not distressed, or if I was not worried about something, or if I did not have something in particular on my mind that was configuring the way I view my environment or my interaction with other people. So excerptions are very much related to past experience and to what has been going on in my life at any given period of time. So excerption, as is the case with many other, with all the other features of conscious interiority, are actually relates to these different features. So, for example, self-narratization. Self-narratization is another key feature of conscious interiority. And in the case of excerption, excerption, well, just read this: the ability to excerpt and see oneself in an interiorized place without any physical limitations. So in other words, in our mental space, and to imagine not yet versions of our future selves produce an I that introspects upon a me. Again, that's a little difficult to follow, I think, because I've thrown in 3 or 4 different features of conscious interiority. But the reason why I did that is I want to show how all these features are at bottom really the same thing. In the same way an atom is one thing. However, for the sake of analysis, for the sake of better understanding, in the same way we can take apart an atom theoretically, we can also, in principle, take apart consciousness and look at the different features of conscious interiority. So that's what I'm trying to do here. And by the way, well, we can talk about this a bit later, but this idea of self-narratization, of course, there's something called narrative therapy. And so you can see here, I won't go into it right now, but we can see the practical applications, the practical implications of understanding something like excerption and how it relates to self-narratization, how we view ourselves in the past and how we might view ourselves in the future. In any case, as I said, we can maybe revisit that topic later. So, therapeutic implications of excerptions. I just already mentioned this idea of narrative therapy. So, and actually, let me, before I go on, I just want to point something out that I think is very important. And I want to point it out now in order to preclude any confusion. Sometimes, well, many times actually, when we have these discussions, many of us confuse perception with what I call introception or mental images. Introception, mental images, is another feature of conscious interiority related to excerptions, not exactly the same thing. But in any case, perception is not the same thing as mental imagery or introceptions or excerptions, right? Perception is something very different. So, for example, animals can perceive. In fact, animals, in many ways, their sensory perceptions are much more sensitive than ours, than humans, right? I mean, we all know that. But animals, despite being able to perceive, to have perceptions, are not conscious the way humans are. Um, and another example, in order to illustrate the difference between perception and introception. Most of the time, the typical individual is perceiving all types of things in the environment. But that does not mean that that individual is conscious, or that individual is not introceiving, right? So introceptions are built upon perceptions. We might define or describe introceptions as interiorized perceptions, but in any case, we have to make a very clear distinction between perception and introceptions and other features of conscious interiority. So again, I just want to emphasize that now, but if anyone has any questions about that, of course, we can talk about that later. Because I'm always surprised when I pick up a book on psychology or cognitive psychology, even though people have done very sophisticated research into the nature of the mind, they often confuse perception with consciousness, or they confuse perception with introception. And this has been going on for centuries. So philosophers of mind, for example, often make this mistake. And I think that mistake leads to a lot of misunderstanding and confusion concerning the nature of consciousness. So in any case, to get back on track, so the therapeutic implications of excerptions, in a lot of therapy, psychotherapy is really about teaching a client how to restructure their thoughts or cognitions. And so, by the way, thoughts and cognitions really mean excerptions. Excerptions is just a more technical way. It carries a certain nuance, I think, a certain connotation, that allows us to understand the nature of consciousness. But for the sake of argument, I think we can say that a more prosaic way to talk about excerptions is just to call them thoughts or cognitions. So one thing that is that many times patients, a lot of their thinking behavior has been described as awfulizing. That's a word that is used in cognitive behavior therapy, or REBT. REBT, of course, shares a lot with CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. REBT, for those of you who probably know, if you do clinical work, just means rational emotive behavior therapy. But in any case, the key term here, awfulizing, magnifying something usually regarded as inconvenient or obnoxious as awful, horrible, terrible. My life is going to end because of this one thing. And this one thing, of course, is represented by an excerption. So the idea here is, as I say, awfulizing can be described as an instance of an excerption taking on a life of its own, snowballing into an over-hypotheticalized, that's a hard word to say, prospective self-narratization. So just let me stop here and point out, and I've mentioned this before, when we talk about features of conscious interiority, those should be viewed as mental abilities that evolved about 3,000 years ago, for those of you who are familiar with Julian Jaynes' argument, as adaptations. So those features of conscious interiority are useful. They evolved for a good reason. However, like many other things that concern the human condition, whether they're psychological abilities or some sort of physical adaptation, there's always a downside. And many times these features of conscious interiority over-adapt. They take on a life of their own. And so this is what this is an example of here, this idea of awfulizing. A similar concept that is used in therapy, catastrophizing, an example of hyper-consciousness. So again, consciousness itself is an adaptation. It usually helps us navigate through life, relying on the features of conscious interiority. But sometimes they over adapt. And so we can talk about, as an example, runaway excerption and consilience. Don't worry about consilience now. I'll talk about that another time. That's kind of a difficult concept. But in any case, runaway excerption exaggerates the consequences of some stressful event. And what we have here, as you can see, something they talk a lot about, especially in cognitive behavior therapy, the cognitive triangle: thoughts, feelings, behavior. And as we know, they're all very much related or interrelated. And so, for example, if you wake up in the morning and you're in a bad mood, well, probably that will be reflected in your behavior, how you treat people, and also in your thoughts. So a thought that would, on an ordinary day when you were in a better mood, would just be a random neutral thought, becomes amplified in a negative way. So the idea here from a therapeutic perspective is to teach people to self-objectively look at their thoughts, monitor their thoughts, and ask themselves, should I really allow this thought to take on a life of its own, this particular cognition or excerption? Should I allow it to start to impact how I feel, my general attitude toward the world on a certain day, and even cause me to behave in a way that I might regret? So I'm just throwing this out there as an example of how, if we understand the nature of consciousness, specifically excerptions, it has a practical application. And by the way, it has a practical application not just in the world of psychotherapy, but for anybody, right? So this is not just, when I discuss these things, this is not just within a clinical context. It's not just within a clinical setting. It's also for anybody, whether you've been diagnosed with something or not, right? This has a sort of everyday, I hope my discussions have an everyday usefulness that we can all learn something from. So this identification, well, before we talk about what that means exactly, this quote, I don't know whether this is my own writing or not, but it's a little bit awkward, but I'll try to go through it anyways. Sometimes that which only constitutes part of our being, for example, various me's, mental content such as thoughts, feelings, perhaps certain roles that we play, could be anything. What happens is those things become over-identified with ourself, and it becomes one's essential being. And we forget that a particular excerption or cognition is not the complete me. It does not define my complete selfhood. And so what we have to do is disidentify that excerption from other things that make up my entire condition, my entire being. Another related to this, actually, a similar concept is this idea of fusion. So they talk about that in some systems of psychotherapy. Fusion means we have a tendency to merge or fuse a thought I have or a problem I have with the rest of my being. And so the idea is to defuse or to disidentify whatever is bothering me, whatever that excerption is, from, as I said, my complete selfhood. And again, this is something that is not necessarily just a clinical issue. This is something that I think all of us in the for lack of a better term, non-clinical population should be doing, right? In order to improve ourselves, in order to have a healthier emotional and psychological life.
Brian, can I ask a question about
Sure.
that? So let's go to the previous slide. So, I mean, we've been discussing similar issues in very different terminology. I want to talk about two different ways. In Tao Te Ching, we're talking about this from Lao Tzu's perspective, and also in Gestalt psychology, we've talked about a similar concept. The way in which Lao Tzu handles it is that he says, the world is what it is, and we name things. And many times when we name things, it doesn't capture the whole of what is being named, but then you regard the names as the thing, and you mistake the name for the thing. So you're missing the whole because you have identified the name with a much narrower version of what is. So that's Lao Tzu's way of looking at it. In Gestalt, there is the concept of ground and figure. So there is the whole, and the figure, you're focusing on one aspect of it. You're paying attention to it, you're naming it, that is in your conscious, but there is this entire ground which supports it. So things that you're describing seems to be holding on to the names, holding on to the figures, and forgetting the ground. And the essential solution is to say, hey, look at the ground behind this figure. Look at what is being named instead of just focusing on the name of it. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes, yes. And I'm glad that you made those linkages, because I think you're right. So what we're talking about here actually is sort of rooted in ancient wisdom in a way, right? In Taoism, and then also Gestalt. I mean, there's a whole system of psychotherapy, Gestalt, and of course they have developed their own particular language to describe these things. But yes, I think that describes it very well. The example you gave in the Gestalt tradition of ground and figure, and how sometimes we obsess about the figure and we are missing the ground. We're missing other figures, in fact. We're just focusing on one figure, and how we give something a name, but that name takes on a reality of its own in our head. And we forget that that name is only pointing to one thing. And so actually in psychotherapy, related to all this, one technique is to have people give a name to something or to point out a figure, not to make that figure go away, or not to erase the name, but to make them feel like they're in more control, because, okay, now I know what that thought is that's bothering me. I didn't give it a description before. Now I've labeled it. It's still there, but because I can compare it to other thoughts in my stream of consciousness, or I can see I can see other figures that are in the ground, as it were. That one particular figure that has been obsessing me now loses its power, and now I can move on and see things from a different perspective. I can reframe what's going on in my life. So yeah, that's I think you really hit the nail on the head, I think, with those two examples. Okay. Um, so yeah, so sort of to continue with this idea, in order to make a conscious choice and stop automatic associations. So that's the issue with excerptions and thoughts in general. Is I'll have an excerption about something, but that excerption is recruiting other thoughts, and those other, or we might say other associations, and sometimes those associations distort what's going on. And a person may start to jump to all types of conclusions. They may start to negatively narratize their future. Something bad is going to happen. Something awful is going to happen. So the idea here is how to train one's eye to rise above all these entangling excerptions. And of course, that's something that can be done in the clinical setting. There are many techniques to do that. But again, I just want to emphasize, this discussion is not restricted just to people who might have some mental health diagnosis. This is something we can all benefit from at the everyday level. So, for example, externalization technique, educating clients to view excerptions related to behaviors or traits that they want to change as being separate from themselves. All right, so separate from themselves. The idea is that whatever those behaviors or traits or cognitions or excerptions, those things do not define me. They're just sort of like something floating on the ocean of my mind. There are many other things floating on the ocean of my mind, some good, some bad, but there's no need to grasp onto just that one thing. Maybe there's something else I'd like to devote my attention to, something that might give me a different perspective or make me feel better. So such differentiation affords individuals a sense of control over their challenges. And so this sense of control, of course, relates to well, another way to describe self-control is self-autonomy. And of course, self-autonomy is another feature of conscious interiority. So I point that out in order to show how all these different things we're talking about, I mean, are interrelated. All these features of conscious interiority are cut from the same fabric. But it helps us to theorize how these different aspects are different for the sake of understanding the nature of consciousness. Okay, uh, to continue with this, looking at things from a therapeutic point of view, so exposure therapy, how does this relate to excerptions? Well, the therapist will have patients or clients confront a feared object or situation by utilizing coping skills such as positive self-talk, breathing exercises, progressive relaxation. And the idea here is when your body is relaxed, it's much easier to confront your inner demons. So patients increase their tolerance for discomfort by putting a distance. Again, this idea of uh, separating or disidentifying or defusing yourself and whatever is bothering you. So to put a distance between themselves and their excerptions. So, when we say yourself, you might view it as the I or subject self. That's sort of another discussion. And their excerptions or any emotional cognitive complexes that are holding you back. And again, this is something we all struggle with on an everyday level, right? And the idea here is just to give some clarity on exactly what these processes are and how we can look at them from a different angle. So patients learn that their apprehensions and anxieties are entities that do not necessarily determine their behavior. Okay. So this actually is the last slide. So I wasn't sure how to end this this discussion, but what I decided to do is end it with a question that really is more of a philosophy of mind question, but I think it does have implications for any psychology or any system of psychotherapy. So when we talk about excerpting, or we talk about how the I edits or selects things out from a stream of consciousness, what or who or what exactly is doing all this excerpting? And in today's discussion, for the sake of convenience, I used I. And as we know, I is just another feature of conscious interiority. So some people would say, well, if you say the I is just another feature of consciousness, the I is just another product of the mind, it does not really tell us who or what is doing the excerpting. There's something else going on there. And this is where things become, for some of us, I suppose, a little bit mystical. It is a difficult question, who or what is doing the thinking, or who or what is doing the excerpting, because many of us assume there must be an executive ego. In fact, that's a commonly used word, right, to answer the question. What made a decision in your mind, or what is doing the thinking. People say, oh, my ego or the self. There's some sort of executive entity, some psychological executor, but that doesn't really answer anything. So we're sort of going around in a circle. And so I'm not going to suggest an answer at this point, but I just thought it might be an interesting intellectual exercise in order to clarify some of the aspects of this whole idea of excerption as a feature of conscious interiority. What is behind the features of conscious interiority is another way to put it. So in any case, I'll end there and open it up for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. All right, folks, time for questions. Go ahead, and as always, we got 4 rules. Rule number 1, type exclamation mark in order to ask a question. Rule number 2, keep on topic. Rule number 3, be brief. And rule number 4, feel free to disagree courteously. Go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom if you would like to ask a question. We're going to start with Elena, followed by Dave. Elena, what's your question?
Hi, Brian. Nice lecture. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if excerption is something similar as imagination.
She's asking whether excerption is similar to imagination. Brian, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, it's not. Okay, there it goes. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, not exactly, but it's certainly related. I mean, you can't really imagine anything or have an imagination unless you have thoughts underlying whatever you're imagining. So again, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's certainly related.
How would you define excerption? What is excerption?
Excerption is when the mind edits out particular thoughts about a thing.
Got it. Excellent. Dave.
Yeah, very interesting talk, Brian. The excerption, the example that I wanted to bring to your attention, and to me, the key word is obsession. That my neighbor is parking in front of my house. What can I do to my neighbor? I've got to get even with him. I've got to get revenge or whatever. And my spouse says, "Dear, I thought you said we're going to go out to dinner." Said, "No, I can't. I have to get even with my neighbor." To me, it seems like it's the opposite of stoicism, which I'm trying to study. That an occurrence happens, and I decide on my reaction to it. And it sounded like this is when something within your brain takes over, as you said, the executive control of whatever, this obsession, and you've lost control of your mind, your body, your life. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Dave, for that. And it's interesting that you mentioned stoicism. Last night, I just happened to be talking to Marcel Couchton, who is the executive director of the Julian Jaynes Society, and he was talking about stoicism and how he said that he's been studying it recently, and he finds it a very useful way to look at the world. So it's kind of an interesting coincidence. But yes, obsession. So an excerption can become an obsession. I mean, an obsession, you might say, is just a particular type of excerption, and a type of excerption that has gone haywire. I mean, usually excerptions are fine. Excerptions are benefits. They're a type. The ability to excerpt is a mental ability that allows us to organize our thoughts and to figure out what's going on in our environment. However, that adaptation can become an over adaptation and turn into something like an obsession. And then, of course, it becomes an even bigger problem if we act on that obsession and maybe say something to the neighbor that we shouldn't say. And so the idea here is to how can we reframe that obsession? How can we take the steam out of that obsession and look at it from a different angle, and perhaps excerpt other thoughts to counter that obsessive excerption, and that way to lower our distress, our mental discomfort, and also to ensure that we don't act out in a way that we might regret. So that's actually, I think, a good example.
So Brian, it looks like a very fundamental point about the way in which the mind works, because there is just so much data that is coming in. So if you say, I'm not going to excerpt, you can't actually function without excerption. You have to selectively say, this is what this event means to me. So there is no alternative but to name things, but to conceptualize, but to excerpt, because that's the only way you can actually use the data. So that's point number one. Second is that you need to have a mechanism for testing. Have you done it right? Have you, are you just holding on to the exception? Because once the exception is produced, it has a power of its own, because it is far more intense. It is far more familiar. It feels like it's yours. And you can get you can fall in love with your ideas, fall in love with your exceptions, regardless of whether they are actually true, whether they are actually beneficial or harmful. So it is all about, we studied the ideas of John Boyd and the OODA loop, where he talks about this entire loop of observing things and orienting and coming up with the orientation and then acting on it. But after you've acted on it, you again observe, and you have to be prepared to reorient, to kind of throw away the previous excerptions, previous organizations, in order to take that feedback and act on it. So it looks like the same prescription of saying that excerption is good, you need it, but it only, reality is the ultimate reality in your life, and the feedback you're getting from life is the ultimate standard, and you have to keep changing your excerptions based on that. Is that the right kind of philosophical position that it is pointing to?
Yes, I think it is. And to make things a little bit complicated, with what you just said, people do not necessarily have to act out their excerptions or their plans. They can act them out consciously, or well, it's not clear. They can act them out in their mental space.
Yes.
And we can't do that for everything, of course, but having that mental space allows us to, in a sort of way, simulate
Yes.
our excerptions. And then we can see, well, on second thought, now I can see why this might be a bad idea to follow up on this excerption or this plan, this train of thought. It may not be a good idea. And, that sounds commonsensical, but of course, there's two things I'd say. One, according to Jaynes, people could not do that so well 3,000 years ago. And then the other thing is, it's a strange thing to say, I think, but we often forget that we can sit down and act things out in our head before acting them out in the physical world. We've all experienced that, I'm sure, when we have engaged in something impulsive or angry or upset. And instead of taking a deep breath and sitting down and playing out different scenarios in our heads, what will happen if I do this or don't do that? And, instead we go and sometimes get ourselves in a bit of trouble. And so it's always useful to remind people that is why we've been given this mental space in our head. It's a very valuable tool. So in any case,
exactly. And there's just kind of completing the analogy with John Boyd. It's kind of what, with this mental space, what we have is what the pilots have as simulators. So you don't actually have to go and crash that many planes and die that many times. You can run the simulator and make sure that you die, your ideas die, and not you. So it's a way of kind of abstracting out. Wonderful. Next up is Patricia, Evanique, and Elena. Patricia, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Brian. I'm just curious, how different is excerption from self-narratization? Because it sounds sort of like excerption is the story we tell ourselves. You know, I pick out one detail of a certain interaction, and that's what I focus on because that's my story. You know, I see things from my worldview. So it's a self-narratization. How is excerption different from that?
Right. So that's a good question. And and as I said before, the tricky part, I think, with trying to understand consciousness or the features of conscious interiority is that they're all cut from the same cloth. They're all really doing the same thing. But the reason why I break consciousness down into these different features is because it allows us to get a better intellectual grasp on exactly what consciousness is doing, how is it functioning. So to answer your question, you know, the way I would view it, excerption is very much a part of, related to self-narratization, but the difference is that I would view self-narratization as a timeline, where excerption is about the different points on the timeline, or the different events, or maybe memories, the different, you might use the word objects that make up that timeline, or perhaps the different versions of ourselves on that timeline. So when we go back in the past, when we look at it, when we use the timeline to go in our previous history, there are different avatars of ourselves that, and we have changed. And so excerption is the, you might say, the units of meaning, or the different points on the timeline of self-narratization.
Excellent. Next up is Evanique, followed by Elena. Evanique.
I just have a question about interception. Oh, I'm sorry, excerption. Is the excerption created by us unconsciously or consciously?
Yes. So that is a really, that is a very good question. So, and this goes back to the last slide about what exactly is doing the excerpting. So I think, to begin to answer your question, what I would say is that excerptions are products of some of our non-conscious mentation, or excerptions are products of non-conscious psychological processes. But the excerptions themselves, the way that we see them in our mind, using the mind's eye, that's a type of consciousness. So another way to put it, where they come from is non-conscious, but what we do with them in our mind space, I would describe as consciousness. So does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good question. That's a very good question, because it gets, and that's the problem with consciousness is, you know, we often forget that most of psychological, most of human mentation, cognition, is not consciousness. Most of it is unconscious.
Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent question. Thank you. Next up is Elena, followed by Dave. Elena.
I don't know. It's so complicated. I have so many questions.
Ask the best.
I don't know. My question sounds so stupid. I feel so stupid.
There are no stupid questions.
I was wondering if this is something socially dependent. For example, if I would be born in whatever, first of all, if I'm a child, do I have the same extent of excerption as a grown-up? Is it something I develop over time and it gets stronger?
Mhm.
Do children have it at all? And when is it starting? And then the second one, is it something, some social environments have it less or more? I don't know. It's just so complicated. And the next thing I also put into, to me, it's the same as fantasy. I don't know, like you take parts of information and then put it together, and then you have a comic book. It's like a fantasy. If this fits in that narrative, and excuse me if it's too stupid.
Okay, no, it's not stupid. It's just too many questions. Let's take the first set of questions. Those are very, very good questions.
Yes.
Let's try to answer some of them. Go ahead, Brian.
Yes, actually, these are very good questions, because it forces me to clarify what I'm trying to say. There's nothing obvious about anything we're talking about today. So I very much appreciate these questions. So the first question about children, when do children start being able to excerpt? And that's a good question, because many of us might make the assumption that excerption is something we're born with, that excerption is a part of the mental machinery, but I don't think that's true. I think that, and this is where Jaynesian psychology comes in, we had to learn to be conscious. So each individual has to learn these different mental capabilities, these features of conscious interiority, such as excerption. So children do not do this naturally, right? We have to be socialized. We have to be in an environment that has a certain language that cultivates this ability to excerpt. It's nothing we're born with. So, when do children acquire this ability, this skill? I'm not sure exactly, but I would say probably by age 6 or 7. So this is a question for a child psychologist, actually, and there's a lot of debate among people who are interested in Jaynes. When does a young individual fully acquire all the features of conscious interiority? It's a little bit complicated, but I would guess maybe age 6 or 7. Maybe some people a little bit younger, some people a little bit older, because remember, this is a very complicated thing. We're talking about 12 or 13 features of consciousness, and not everybody is going to acquire them in the same way at the same time. Some people will be very good with certain features, some people a little bit weak. It really depends on so many things going on. Actually, it relates to your second question about the social environment, and so I think in certain historical periods, certain features of conscious interiority were emphasized, certain features were not emphasized. It also has to do with levels of education. What type of education did a person receive? So, for example, in the Middle Ages, many people were illiterate or not literate because they were never trained to read or write. So if you're not trained to read or write, you're still going to be conscious, but certain features of that consciousness may not be as sharp, because we know that literacy and education in general actually makes certain features of consciousness uh, more effective. So it's a very complicated issue. But in any case, to kind of just sum up, the way I would look at it is that your social environment definitely plays a big role in determining what features you'll cultivate in your mind. Uh, and that's something that really needs to be investigated, because we assume it's easy to say, well, everybody's conscious now in the modern world, but it's more complicated than that, right? Because some of us use these certain skills better than others. So in fact, there are some people who do not have the ability for some reason to use mental imagery, but they may be but other features of consciousness, such as self-autonomy or self-reflexivity, they may be very strong on. So each individual is different. And why we have these differences, it's for many, many reasons. Education, personal experience, um, who we've been exposed to. There's no, unfortunately, there's no one answer as to why. But I'm glad that you brought that up.
Thank you.
Did you have another question?
Let's go back. Let's get other people in, and then we'll go back to Elena. Jeff, followed by Dave. Jeff.
Hey, Brian, thanks for another wonderful presentation here. I'm wondering, either in therapy or generally, is there a question, or are there a couple questions that sort of invite or provoke ourselves or each other to do this well?
You mean to excerpt well?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Now, what question would you pose to somebody to invite or to support them or help them do that?
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, it's what would happen is, I mean, the way I do it, of course, the first time someone comes in to see me, I'll do an assessment, and as part of that assessment, I'll ask them, why are you here today, and go from there. Or I might ask, what would you like to see? You know, you seem upset today. What do you think? What would you like to be different in your life? What would change tomorrow? What would, if you wanted to change something, what would that be? And then that gives me a big clue, of course, as to whatever excerption is on their mind, whatever thought or cognition they might be obsessing over, they might be worried about. And sometimes it's not really clear. They know they'll come up with a list of things that are bothering them, and then of course it becomes a challenge to figure out, are these things all related, are they different things in the individual's mind? What can we do to sort of get some perspective on how they may not be related? So there's really no one way in particular. I mean, the way, like I said, the way I like to do it is just allow the client to do most of the talking, and then I'm always very cautious, but I might suggest some connections that I notice. If they keep repeating the same word, or they keep repeating the same problem, then I might say, well, you know, you've mentioned this in the past 2 or 3 sessions. It seems to me something that's bothering you. So maybe let's focus on this particular thought or problem. I don't use the word excerption usually with clients, because it's sort of it sounds a bit technical, I think. I mean, it depends where they're coming from. But in any case, does that answer your question?
Okay.
Yeah, yes. I think I didn't ask it well. I think what I meant to say was, so first of all, absolutely, you might look at the repetition of words, or maybe a really strong expression of, a feeling about something, like they're just really upset about that thing, and that would definitely be a sign. And then I think what I was intending to ask was, so then, maybe, sort of, is there another way to see that, or is there something about it that particularly is really, scary for you, or troubling, or offensive, or whatever it might be, that, or even just as open-ended as, what really bothers, what concerns or bothers or troubles you the most about it, something like that, that invites somebody to not only see the stick, but the ground, or to see the others, or to see other sticks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So yeah, what I would do would be to help them identify and isolate whatever that excerption is. And of course, You do that with a lot of who, when, why, how type questions, and especially who, because then we're talking about something social, something interpersonal. And from my experience, most of the time, people have problems that relate to interpersonal relationships, or interpersonal relationships somehow play a role in giving a person a problem or making their problems worse. They feel they have no one to talk to, no one understands them. But in any case, the way I look at it is to make it as concrete as possible and to sort of pull out of that individual the details of what that excerption is. And a very important question is, when did this start to bother you, this thought or this emotion, cognitive complex, however you want to describe it? Did something happen in your life around that time that, what was going on? Have you done anything in the past that has helped you sort of get control, some self-autonomy over this this thought that seems to be bothering you?
Next up is Dave.
Yeah, Brian, thinking about this, it seems like this excerption is cutting things down to manageable size. And the word that comes to mind is essence. That if a friend asks me about a restaurant that's one of my favorites, I could talk for hours about that restaurant, about the tablecloth and what's on the menu and the, what pictures are on the wall interior. But typically what he wants is just a, 2 or 3 sentences of information. It's very nice. The cuisine's wonderful. It's a beautiful interior. As I said, essence, I boil it down to, a manageable amount of information. And then I think if he comes back and say, tell me more about it, then well, what I had the last time was the lamb, and it was marvelous. And just meld them. As you said, linking memories together. Or myself, I might, sometime reflect, wow, that last night I had eaten out was such a wonderful experience, and I'm just going to relish the thought for a while, and say in the dark or whatever. But is that kind of where we're driving at with this?
Yes. Yes, it is. I like that description of something manageable units, manageable units of meaning or thought. And especially if something is bothering a person. And, many times I think we need to label our thoughts in order to manage them. So there's a bad side and a good side to naming our thoughts, right? So when the good side is when we name them, it gives us something to identify. We've isolated something. Now we can talk about it in a more coherent fashion. Now we can start to see how it relates to other thoughts or other things going on in my life. But the bad side, of course, is we reify it. We give it a life all its own sometimes, and then it can become an obsession. But in any case, usually that doesn't happen. Usually what happens is we're able to manage different thoughts because we label it. We give it a sort of identity. And this is something that we do all the time, constantly, of course. But I think in order, as I said many times, this is not just a clinical issue. I think this is also a sort of self-improvement issue. If we can monitor our thoughts and give them the proper names and see how our thoughts are chained together or maybe not chained together, that is a way of getting to know ourselves better.
Thank you. Last question is by Elena.
How big is the portion of excerption in the interaction with someone?
Okay. I didn't quite get the.
How big is a portion of excerption in percentage when you talk to someone?
Well, I think it depends on the particular individual. It depends on the the purpose of the interaction. I don't think there is. I don't think there is one percentage or proportion. I think it depends on variables. And those variables, of course, are determined by, as I said, what's the purpose of speaking to someone? Why do they want? Why are they pointing out a certain thought? There is no one percentage.
Okay. Last question is going to be by Laura. Laura, can you go ahead and ask a brief question? Laura, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm in a school district. I'm a curriculum developer. I have to be in charge of developing a curriculum for K through 12. They want something that's smooth, transitional, big ideas, want to teach kids for the 21st century. And so how do I take something like you've been talking about as a curriculum developer and put this thing to paper? I have all this, I'm going through this mental thing now. Okay, this is okay, this is a meta level thing. Okay, that becomes an objective. And go through this. Okay, that oh, but that, okay, so then that meta thing now becomes an objective. The objective, okay, I want to reach that objective, that objective I go through. And then these little things that, okay, this is cognitive. And so everything, how do I do this? Because it's massive. Because I got to think about, so now I started thinking, okay, I'll take overlays. I'll do something for each one. And then I'll overlay it on top. So I'll see on that timeline how I think it. So how do you do that, huh? How do I write a curriculum for this? That's the question.
Okay. That's a big question. And I think it's difficult to answer because I think it depends on what you're trying to do exactly with the curriculum. I mean, I can tell you many times I've struggled with something similar, and the way that I handle it myself is very simple. Is just pen and pencil to just write things down without worrying about at first any coherency or any order or trying to fit things together like a puzzle. I just write things down on a blank piece of paper, and then I look at it, and then I start to try and put those excerptions together, or I see how sometimes they naturally, organically fit together in a way I would not be aware of if I did not just jot them down. So I guess the technique there is one of externalization, getting those thoughts and those ideas out there, and then that makes it easier for us to organize them, because we begin to see patterns that maybe we cannot see using our mind space. We cannot see using mental imagery. The only way to see things is to literally see them by, as I said, writing them all out. Just like modern art, just jot words down here, there, and everywhere, and don't worry about order. The order, the conceptualization, the organization of the thoughts will come later.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Great presentation and great Q&A. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time at next Sunday at 12 o'clock.
Sunday, okay.
Next Sunday. Oh, no, Saturday. Sorry. Saturday.
Okay.
Saturday at 12, as usual. Okay. Back to the regular time.
All right, good.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Very good questions. Very enjoyable.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.